This is Parshat Vayishlach. It's November the 15th, 2021. Here in the HPCT CAE YouTube Parsha class. And this Parsha is, it's a complicated Parsha, difficult Parsha. I would be remiss if I didn't say it's an amazing Parsha. It is filled with a lot of different things in it, most of which we're not going to do. The interesting parts I had fond recollections of our class last year when I did the reconciliation between Esav and Yaakov, and I put on the video of Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis hugging each other. I hope you remember that fondly. You can see it in last year's video at the Jerry Lewis telethon. I thought that was a great moment that paralleled the reconciliation between the two brothers. And as emotional as that moment is, it is of a different kind of emotional intensity than other things in the Parsha. And that includes both the rape of Dinah, the ravishing of Dinah, and the death of Rachel, the death of Isaac as well. And even though probably the death of the ravishing of Dinah is probably the most problematic story in this Parsha, I think I need another year to prepare for that lecture. It's with all the tools that we have at our disposal in terms of analyzing it, and I suppose that you could all read this text carefully now with some of the tools that we've been using, just in terms of close analysis. You would be able to get a lot of information out of it. But I want to focus on the death of Rachel, and I think that again, the economy of the words, the economy of the language, and the questions that I'm asking regarding this story relate to the relationship between Jacob and Rachel, the puzzles around her death, why she's buried where she is, what happened, how did she die, all of that, which I think the Torah obviously doesn't go into in any big detail, and how this story of her death is contextualized in both the stories of Jacob and then, of course, in the whole Torah, and perhaps beyond that in the whole Bible and all of Jewish history, just to kind of go to the end point, which is, it's not a place that we visit on trips today as much as we did in the past, for obvious reasons. The tomb of Rachel is located in Bethlehem. If you go on to Google Maps and you do a kind of, the pedestrian view, you'll see that the separation wall is pretty much close by to the tomb of Rachel. Bethlehem is not as difficult an area to go to than, let's say, Hebron, Kiryat Arba, and other places, but it is not now a primary place of tourism for us. However, it still is very much a place in the world of religious Judaism, ultra-Orthodoxy, and Zionist Orthodoxy. It's still a very, very important place, and associated with the deep contemplative prayer and prayer. You make a pilgrimage to the tomb of Rachel when you are in deep need, and of course, it'll be a place for marriages and or to seek a mate, and to also seek childbirth, because Rachel is associated with both of those things. So and it's not an accident that it's become that kind of shrine in contemporary Judaism. But that is after 4,000 years of history. So let's get to the text now, and we will begin to explore this remarkable story and how we're going to analyze this. I'm going to do the story first in English, and then we're going to do it in Hebrew verse by verse. Okay, and as you have been able to see over the last several weeks, I wish the translations could be so perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect translation. So that's why I want to kind of get the story into your heads through English, and then do it really very closely with the Hebrew, so that we can see what's going on textually and philosophically. So here's the story. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and remain there, and build an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you were fleeing from your brother Esau." So Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, "Rid yourselves of alien gods in your midst, purify yourselves, and change your clothes. Come, let us go up to Bethel, and I will build an altar there to the God who answered me when I was in distress, and who has been with me wherever I have gone." They gave to Jacob all the alien gods that they had, and the rings that were in their ears, and Jacob buried them under the terebinth that was near Shechem. As they set out, a terror from God fell on the cities round about, so that they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. Thus Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him. There he built an altar and named the site Bethel, for it was there that God had revealed himself to him when he was fleeing from his brother. Devorah, Rebekah's nurse, died and was buried under the oak below Bethel. So it was named Alon Bahut. God appeared again to Jacob on his arrival from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. God said to him, "You whose name is Jacob, you shall be called Jacob no more, but Israel shall be your name." Thus he named him Israel. And God said to him, "I am El Shaddai, be fertile and increase. A nation, yea, an assembly of nations shall descend from you. Kings shall issue from your loins. The land that I assigned to Abraham and Isaac I assign to you, and to your offspring to come will I assign the land." God parted from him at the spot where he had spoken to him, and Jacob set up his pillar at the site where he had spoken to him, a pillar of stone, and he offered a libation on it and poured oil upon it. Jacob gave the site where God had spoken to him the name Bethel. They set out from Bethel, but when they were still some distance short of Ephrat, Rachel was in childbirth, and she had hard labor. When her labor was at its hardest, the midwife said to her, "Have no fear, for it is another boy for you." But as she breathed her last, for she was dying, she named him Ben-Oni, but his father called him Benjamin. Thus Rachel died. She was buried on the road to Ephrat, now Bethlehem. Over her grave Jacob set up a pillar. It is the pillar at Rachel's grave to this day. Israel journeyed on and pitched his tent beyond Migdal Eder. While Israel stayed in the land, Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and Israel found out. Now the sons of Jacob were 12 in number. The sons of Leah, Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, Shimeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zvulun. The sons of Rachel, Joseph, and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maid, Dan and Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's maid, Gad and Asher. These are the sons of Jacob who were born to him in Padan Aram. Jacob came to his father Isaac at Mamre, at Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, where Abraham and Isaac had sojourned. Isaac was 180 years old. When he breathed his last and died, he was gathered to his kin in ripe old age, and he was buried by his sons Esau and Jacob. Okay, that's where the story ends. You could see there just having placed it in front of you, and you may, if you have a Chumash beside you, it's chapter 35. Um, there's just a lot of information there. It's a hard story or set of stories to really examine in the abstract, because there's just so much going on there. And there's so much already that's familiar to us, because we have already seen this place, Bethel, and we've already experienced Jacob's name being changed from Jacob to Israel. As you know, Jacob's name is changed to Israel in the encounter with the mysterious assailant, which takes place at the beginning of our Parsha, when Jacob dispatched messengers to Esav and then set up two camps. He is alone at the ford of the Jabbok River, and that is where he encounters the mysterious assailant, and they wrestle all night. And it's at that point that Jacob asks for a blessing, and the mysterious assailant says to him, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, you will be called Israel, for you have striven with mortals and with God." And so that's the typical etymology of the name Yisrael. But here is another etymology which has no mention of the story. So in all, what the scholars will say is that there are two Bethel traditions. There's a Bethel tradition that we saw at the beginning of last week's Parsha, where Jacob has the dream that he is lying there and sees a stairway to heaven, and angels going up and down on it, and that is one tradition. He takes his oil and anoints the rock and names the place Bethel, and from there moves on. So it becomes a major shrine. And then there's the second tradition, which is Jacob already in the land, back in the land, where he encounters the same space where God had appeared to him. It makes reference to the earlier idea that God had appeared to him. He names the place again, it seems, and anoints it again, and that's how it has. I want to just take a moment to do some geography with you, because I think that that's really important. If it gives us a little bit of a sense of how this story is unfolding, just in terms of the map, okay? And let me do that right now. Here we go. Okay, so this is what Google Maps pulls up. If you were to plan your trip from Haran to the land of Israel, it would look more or less like this. That is to say, if we know where these places are. Um, and Google has it as a 199-hour trip, 967 kilometers, plus or minus. So what is 200 hours? It's I estimated that it's about a month on foot. If you travel 6 hours a day, maybe 5 hours a day, it's it's a 40-hour trip, but 40-day trip. I'm sorry. So it could be anywhere from 1 to 2 months of journeying, and that the terrain that we are on. I'm just going to give you the satellite photo of this. That's what the terrain looks like, from satellite. Um, and it's if you've ever driven through this area, it is a very, very rugged terrain. Okay, let me go back to this view, because I want to just give you the idea. So from Haran, he's going all the way into the Jabbok River. I'm going to just enlarge this for a second, and go like this here. So Zarka River is what some identify as the Jabbok River. You can't really see. Can you see the I guess it would be. All of these rivers are kind of dried up at this point. here. So it's in this area that the stories are taking place. What how this what's going on here archaeologically? I really don't know. I mean, there are archaeological sites in this area, some significant ancient Bronze Age sites, to be sure. Um, and but this is under the jurisdiction of Jordan. And this is in present day Jordan. You can see it's just a little northwest of Amman. Okay, and in truth, I don't know what the route would have been from the Jabbok across the Jordan to this side. Okay, Google has me going south through Jericho, and crossing over here. This little squiggly line here is the Jordan, um, uh, and you can see the Jordan empties into the Dead Sea. Oops. Right. So this is the Dead Sea. But it's quite likely that the crossing would have taken place maybe uh, further north. We have no idea. Uh, but the point is that Jacob will end up in Nablus is the Arab name for Shechem. It's at Shechem. So just dial back for a second. Here in this general vicinity is where the angel at the Zarqa River, the Jabbok River, the angel is fighting with Jacob. It's kind of over here. Jacob meets with Esav. I guess it's not in the land of Canaan per se, that is over the Jordan, but it could be. But Jacob has to cross the Jordan to get to the land, and then sojourns in Shechem. When the Torah tells us in this week's Parsha that he arrives in Shechem, he arrives whole, shalem. He's in a good place in Shechem. Except in the previous chapter 34, that is when things really go wrong for Jacob. And that is the story that I think I'll promise you next year to do, the rape of Dinah, chapter 34. A very, very difficult, horrible, horrible story with rape and the acts of vengeance of Shimon and Levi. All that takes place in Shechem, which is Nablus here. Jacob, at the end of that story, feels that he can't live there anymore. I guess because when your two sons massacre the inhabitants of the area, you kind of have a lousy relationship with your neighbors. So, what was true in the Bible, at least in the biblical story, is true to this day, which is where calamity happens, atrocities happen. However, you try and understand them. The echoes and the memories of that live on. I'm remarking on this, thinking about a movie that I want to see in the film series, the Rutgers film series, the Miranau movie. Right? It's a movie about the people who presently live in Muranau, which is the Warsaw Ghetto district in Warsaw, and I just saw the trailer of it. The trailer was fascinating enough to make me want to see the movie, which was that the people live with the ghosts of Warsaw Jewry, and it takes quite a long time in the history of human beings for atrocities and previous calamities to fade from memory, and that is certainly true in Eastern Europe, and it may be true elsewhere in the world with longer histories of memory. These things don't fade away quickly. So they need to go away. They move from Shechem, and he's going south. And our story starts in Bethel. And this is where, and we're going to look at it now in much greater depth, Bethel, he builds another altar, and from Bethel he goes. Jerusalem doesn't exist in the way, of course, it exists today, but south of Jerusalem, as you know, is uh, uh, Bethlehem, and the Rachel's tomb, which is highlighted on Google Maps here, is south of Jerusalem. It's really not long. It's about 4 miles from the center of Jerusalem, which is, as the crow flies. Uh, this is what Israelis call Route 60, Kvish Shishim, right? Kvish Shishim is what goes south out of Jerusalem. You probably have to go through the Gilo Junction somewhere. And Gilo is one of the southern districts of Jerusalem. Gilo is like an entire neighborhood, which, still under the United States is called, quote unquote, a settlement. Gilo is basically inseparable from the rest of Jerusalem. Uh, and there is the barrier. Today, the barrier is right after Gilo, and then Rachel's tomb is right after the barrier. Okay, I should have pulled in Moshe Gold for this one. Okay, and then uh, and Rachel's tomb is really part of today's Bethlehem. So when Jacob is moving south, he's got a destination in mind. His destination in mind, I guess, is going to be Hebron. Hebron is another 20 some odd miles from Bethlehem, 20 miles south of Bethlehem. On Google Maps, it's about 25 miles from Jerusalem. Okay, so I'm just going to make this short here. So you can see here that he's doing what is essentially the mountain ridge from Shechem to Hebron. And if you can just put it in your mind's eye on if you've ever been on the bus in the West Bank or through the West Bank, you know that the West Bank is an elevated mountain area. It's not a plateau in the sense that it's not all flat. It's obviously very, very hilly, but the mountain range, these are the Judean and the Samarian ranges. The north is what we call Samaria, and the south is Judea, and these are both high rolling mountain areas. Okay, so the journey is going to be from Shechem all the way down to Hebron, and the major events that happen here take place in Bethel, in Derech Ephrata, which is outside of Bethlehem. Bethlehem is starting there, and then he ends up in Hebron, where the cave of the patriarchs is, and that is essentially where he is going to live. That is, Jacob's going to live until the next set of stories. So the geography actually is quite important. I just want to point out Beersheba here, and Beersheba, while not directly south, is just a little southwest of Hebron. It's the the other at the crossroads of from Gaza to Jordan, basically. And for all sorts of reasons which are not known to me, the geography, topography, etc., and probably also having to do with water resources. You can see you're around a lot of desert here, but there are probably a lot of aquifers that are accessed here and wells. So Beersheba was able to sustain habitation. Okay. So the geography is actually really important in understanding the story. Today, we can do these trips, in half a day, less than a couple of hours, really. In antiquity, as I said, it's a 200-day journey, and from Shechem to Jerusalem to Hebron, really is a couple of days on foot. Okay, if you don't want to kill yourself. All right, that's what the geography looks like. All right, I'm going to now go to the text, and we'll read it closely. in a way that I think will be meaningful. Okay, here we go. So, Vayomer Elohim el Yaakov, Kum, Ale Betel, V'shev sham, V'aseh sham mizbeach, La'el hanir'eh elecha, Bevarchecha mipnei Esav achicha. Kum Ale Betel means get up and go to Betel, and he's coming from that area just after or before the Jordan, from his escape from Lavan. So in the context of his life, he's spent 20 years with Lavan. It's not only a geographical context; it's a temporal context, right? He is, we don't really know how old he is here. If you say that he was 60 when he married Rachel and Leah, he's 80 now. It's 80, 80 for us is up there in years. But 80 for the Bible he's just getting going. Okay, make a mizbeach, make an altar there to God who appeared to you. So he has had all of these different kinds of emotional and cathartic and tragic experiences right up until this moment. Right up until this moment, he has re-encountered his brother. He's safe in the land, except for the fact that his daughter has been raped and there's been a massacre, and now he is told to move on. Okay, Vayomer Yaakov el Beito. So he says to his whole household, Ve'el kol asher imo, and all the people who are with them, Hasiru et Elohei nechar asher betochechem v'taharu v'achlifu simlotechem. So he's saying basically, get all the other idols that are with you and put them away. Purify yourself and change your clothing. What is that? What's going on there? So it just seems, in light of other events in which these kinds of things take place, that this is preparation. You recall that at Mount Sinai, the people are told to wash their clothing. They're not told to, change their clothing. But clothing, of course, is significant in the ritual life of people moving through transitional phases. So, for example, the leper or someone who is impure or someone who has contact with the dead or the high priest on Yom Kippur has to experience many, many changes of clothing. And we understand that, I think, intuitively today, clothing still operates in this deep anthropological significance. You won't go to an important event necessarily in a pair of jeans in your day clothes, although that depends on which culture you are in. You tend to, change your clothes for more sacred kinds of events. Okay, and purification. What did that entail? The Bible here doesn't specify. Possibly could have meant some kind of cleansing, immersion, or whatever. Usually that's what it means. So here it's in anticipation of some kind of revelatory event. Notice that it also says, Kol asher imo. Who are the people that are with Jacob? The people that are with Jacob are, I guess, a whole entourage. Look, right now, he's got 11 sons. He's got one daughter. He's got 4 wives, that is 2 wives and 2 concubine wives. He's also got some maidservants, manservants. We'll find out later he's got a midwife, cooks, bottle washers, butlers, launderers, attendants, other people. There's a whole retinue of people. And this ought to make us think about Abraham, who similarly, and this is probably not accidental as far as the Torah is concerned, because the connection between Avraham and Yaakov is really quite deliberate. Abraham also has an entourage. When it says that Abraham took all the people, HaNefesh Asher Asa Becharan, it does mean that he had a whole retinue of people, although he didn't have any children. He just had a wife, and he had maybe his servants and his sheep, his flocks. Here, it's clear that it's everybody. But what I find interesting here is that it's God who's saying to Jacob in the singular, kum ale vetel, which hints to me or echoes to me alech lecha. Even though the words lech lecha are not used, it's done in the singular, which is you go. So whenever the Torah says you singular, you wonder whether or not it's you really singular or you singular representing you plural. And I wouldn't mind making this kind of statement, which is that maybe the intention was for him to go by himself and have a personal revelation, but there was no way that he was going to go by himself. We have seen, in this Parsha alone, you have to pay attention to the moments where Jacob is alone and the moments where Jacob is together with people. When he fights with the mysterious assailant, it says, "Vayikachem vayivater Yaakov levado," that Jacob was left alone. That's very significant, and we obviously like to make a whole story about the fact that he was by himself. He was wrestling with his own conscience. Maybe the mysterious assailant is some kind of manifestation of his quote unquote demons that he has got to wrestle with himself. And so maybe what you have here is a further understanding that what is taking place in Jacob's life is really directed to him, but he is also a family now, and his family creates his identity. His family really is the structure around his identity. So there's no way that he's going to go by himself to Bethel, even though God says kum ale Bethel. Just as, and I do make this point often, God says to Abraham, lech lecha, and go, what I think is go for yourself, go by yourself. And there's no way that he's going to go by himself because he knows that he has a relationship. He's tied to his wife Sarah, and he's tied to his nephew Lot. So here, Jacob also is going to go with everybody that is with him. Okay, so Vayomer Yaakov el Beito, verse Bet, Ve'el kol asher imo, and all who's with him, Asiru kol nechar, get rid of all the idols, and we're going to have this event, so purify yourselves, get ready for this event. V'nakuma, and we'll go up. V'na'aleh, and we will get up. Bethel, we'll go to Bethel. I will make the altar La'el ha'oneh oti b'yom tzarati, to the God who answered me on my day of anguish. Vayhi imadi b'derech asher halachti, and who was with me on the way that I went. So here I think that the text is very, very clever, careful to give us this, by putting everything in Yaakov's mouth, basically saying, look, this was personal. When I left for Haran, I was by myself. Nobody here existed. So this moment of coming back into the land is a moment of personal accomplishment. It's a moment of personal pilgrimage. So how can it not contain at its very depth a personal dimension? Okay, whenever we do a pilgrimage, to ancestral lands or ancestral to the home, it does take place on multiple levels, right? I was, my mother's on the thing, I was just in Ottawa, so going to Ottawa, it's personal, but of course it's also family. When I take my family to my home, it's like, and I go visit places that were important to me. This place was important to me, and look, it's important to all of us because it's important to me. And I'm sure many of you have had those kinds of experiences when you take your family to places that are important to you. This is where I grew up, right? This is the home where I grew up. This is the place where I went. This is the place where I went to school. This is the place where how I met your mother, that kind of thing. These places are important to me, and therefore they're important to all of us. So here he makes a mizbeach, he makes an altar for the sake of recognizing the personal salvation or the personal moments of intercession that God had made with him. And notice also that when things go awry with him in Shechem, he refers to it personally. Uh, if you go back to that story in chapter 34, the rape of Dinah, he says to Jacob, he says to Simon and Levi, "You have brought trouble on me, making me odious among the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. I am few in number, so if they unite against me and attack me, I and my house will be destroyed." Everything is related to it very personally, and that begs the question, which is, at what point does Jacob transition from being the singular clan leader to the and recede to the and be subordinated to the role of the to the for when the tribes the brothers ascend, and that is obviously going to come next week. Then in next week everything takes over from Jacob. Jacob becomes subordinated to the story of the brothers. So what you have here, I think, literarily and historically, is this is precisely the moment of transition, leading up in. He's back in the land. He gets his name reminded to him in both the assailant story and in the Bethel story. The rape of Dinah is a transition moment, and also, of course, leading up to the death of Rachel. Okay, so now, so he tells them to take their idols and gold rings off, and it's very strange. Vayitnu el Yaakov et kol Elohei hanechar. They give him all the stuff, et hanizamim asher bo'oznehem, and the commentators say, well, maybe he took them all. They took them all from the Shechemites, as part of the plunder. Vayitmon otam Yaakov. Vayitmon means he buried them, but it doesn't. It's not the same as kavar. Vayitmon means you kind of put it away as a treasure, right? You bury it as and almost in the sense that you're going to come back and retrieve it, okay, at some point. It's like the way that people hid their valuables in the ghetto. They buried them, so because if we survive, we will get them back. Tachatei Ayla asher im Shechem. And he goes, Vayisa'u, Vayichitat Elohim al ha'arim. The fear of God was on the cities around them. The Lo radfu acharei bnei Yaakov. This is a very strange sentence. I'm not exactly sure how to understand it, but in order to get from one place to the other, they needed to have protection. And it's almost as if they have a force field around them. I like to use that science fiction metaphor, that in traveling from Shechem, probably going to Hebron along the mountain ridge that we saw in the map, they need a bubble. They need a force field. Why do they need a force field? Well, two sons have already committed a massacre of Canaanites. The Canaanites probably have a league of, like a defense pact, like a NATO pact among the Canaanites, and they might be tempted to exact vengeance off of this clan, and so they needed protection. Okay, Vayavo Yaakov Luza, Be'er Beretz Canaan Hu Beitel Hu V'chol Asher. He gets to Luz. We already know that Luz is the name of Bethel, because losers live in Luz and Bethelites live in Bethel, and that's where he makes the Mizbeach. He makes the altar. Vayiven Sham Mizbeach. He names the place Bethel because that's where God appeared to him when he left his brother. And here we get this very interesting piece of information. Vatamot Dvorah Meneket Rivka. The Devorah, the nurse of Rivka, dies, and she is buried under or beneath Bethel, beneath a tree, a special oak, and that is called Alon Bachut. Who is this Dvorah? She wasn't really mentioned prior. She wasn't named, but when Rebecca moves from Padan Aram to Canaan, she takes with her, and as I point out here in verse 24:59, she takes with her Meneket, a nurse. What does that mean? It gives rise to the idea that she's quite a young woman, but she's really I almost think of it as like, Helen Keller throughout her life had the person that was with her all her life, from the time she was a child, right? Who taught her how to read. She stayed with her. She was her personal aide. So Rebecca had a personal aide that stayed with her, and her name was Devorah. Why is she still there? We don't know what happened to Rebecca. Rebecca is probably, she's probably passed away at this point. So Devorah is probably the last link that Jacob has to his mother. And I think that this, by interpreting it that way, it kind of raises the emotional temperature of the story. That here in this story, we are going to experience within the space of a very short time the reporting of 3 deaths. One, the maternal death, that is to say, the person most linked to his mother, Rebecca. And second, his most important wife, Rachel, the mate, the love mate, passing. And then his father, with whom we really don't know what kind of relationship he has, but his father dies at the end of this chapter as well. All of that is signaling to us we're reaching moments of transition here. So she is the last, probably the last living connection to Jacob's mother. And I mentioned here in brackets, we reached a point in the life of Abraham with the death of Sarah that he has nobody left to him. When Sarah dies, Hagar is already gone, and Isaac is on his own. Abraham has no father, he's no brother. His other brother is in Aram. He's really alone. I wanted to do as a part of the class, to chart out all the relationships that Abraham has, and when you look at it on a chart and you put an X through, all the people that are gone for him, there's only Abraham that's left. He's all alone, which underscores, I think, thematically, why he's in a rush to get married again. He has another woman, Keturah. I made a big deal of that in that class. I think there's something similar going on here, which is that, without any connection to his mother, without any connection to his wife, what's he going to do? Well, unlike Abraham, Jacob actually has a full family. He's got 11 children, and of course, when Benjamin is born, there's 12 sons and 1 daughter. There's a whole family there. So it's not as if he needs to go and get married again. He's got another 3 wives. He's not alone, right? And that's going to play very significantly in the story. So God appeared to him, and he blessed him. And here again, he gets a name change, just like Abraham. Shimcha Yaakov, lo yikara Shimcha od Yaakov, ki im Yisrael, your name will be Israel. Shia Shimcha v'yikra Shemo et Yisrael. God blesses him. And I just had to point out in color here how this verse looks like. What would be in verse 11, Yud Aleph, Vayomer lo Elohim, Ani El Shaddai, I am the Almighty, pray urvei, be fruitful and multiply, goy ukal goyim, a nation and a whole congregation of nations will ensue from you, umlachim mechalatzecha yetzeo, and kings will issue from your loins. Ve'et haaretz asher natati, LaAvraham uLiyitzchak lecha etnena uLazaracha acharecha eten et haaretz. And the reason why I drew circles and ran around this is to show you that this is what we call chiasma. Chiasma is the ABBA pattern. ABBA. Aretz, natati, eten, et haaretz. It's and it's inverted, and it's whenever we see that in the Bible is trying to tell us something important. And also, I like to do the counting of words and find the middle word. The middle word of this verse is lecha. So all of this is focused on to you, to you, to you. This is going to be given to you. So it's clear then, if the theme is transition, that the entire weight of the biblical promise is now fully transitioned to Jacob, not without its problems. So he's got all of this blessing now. He goes up, Vayame alav Elohim, God ascends, Vayatsev Yaakov matzeva, Jacob likes to put stones and pour oil, and he makes a monument, and he calls this place Bethel. And he goes from Bethel, and this is where we get into Rachel. Vayis'u mi Bethel, they travel from Bethel, vayot kivrata aretz, and there's a long way to go, Lavo Ephrata, to get to Ephrat. Vateled Rachel vatikash belidata. How we translate this is really, really very complicated. When I read this, Vateled Rachel, it seems that it means she gave birth. She gave birth. Vatikash belidata means, and she had a difficult time in giving birth. So the child is born already. It seems you can interpret it one way and say that the child is already out of her, right? And she's having postpartum complications. Okay, so the JPS translation, Rachel was in childbirth and she had a hard labor. I'm not sure exactly, but the kash belidata, they're translating belidata as the labor as opposed to the birth. So it's just a little bit of a shade around this and giving it an interpretation saying that the labor was difficult, possibly because, yes, some labors are extraordinarily difficult. Okay? Everett Fox, Rachel began to give birth and she had a very hard birthing. There he kind of gets out of the problem by using the word birth and birthing. Okay? So both of those translations tell us that something was wrong. Something went wrong. She gave birth, or Vatikash, she had difficulty in birthing. And if you want to spend time and just, I just Googled what could go wrong in childbirth. And it's too bad Renee Gross is not here because we'd get a whole professional analysis. Although I know, Bob, you could probably add in a lot here. And tons of things can go on that are wrong in childbirth. That is in the childbirth. And of course, postpartum, some terrible things could happen that make birthing, a very, very dangerous experience, especially for certain kinds of women who may whether, and here again, in obstetrics, there are just catalogs and textbooks filled with complications. What happens when the baby is breech, what happens when the baby is big, what happens when the baby is malformed, what happens when the baby, and when there's too much bleeding. And as everyone here knows, it can be life-threatening and often was in antiquity. Okay? Well, the midwife, Bahi Bikshata Bilidata, when it got very difficult in the birth or after the birth, Vatomer laha mialedet, the midwife said, Al tiri ki gam ze lach ben. Don't worry, it's a boy. and the only reason why I laugh is because no midwife or obstetrician would ever get away with saying that today, right? You could never say to the mother, "Oh, be happy, it's a boy," right? But the reason why she says that is because when Joseph was born, she said, Yosef li ben acher. May God grant me another son. So the midwife present at the last birth, I'm assuming that it's the same midwife. Just like Rebecca had a meneket, had her own nurse, so does Rachel. Rachel has her own attendant, and this attendant attended to her previous birth. And at her previous birth, when she named Joseph, she said to Joseph, may God give me another son. And so the midwife sees this other child and says, Rachel, you did it again. Don't worry, it's a boy. Okay? And she obviously is happy about this, but she's losing consciousness very quickly. And your guess is as good as mine as to what is going on here, whether she's just bleeding to death or something other than that is tragically happening. But she's dying. Betzet nafsha ki meta, as her soul is going out, as her breath is going out, she is dying. So she calls him Ben Oni. And this name Ben Oni is a source of great bewilderment and puzzles for commentators. On means strength, but on also means hardship. So is she naming him the son of my strength because I've given you the last ounce of my strength? Or is she saying in grief, you are the son of my hardship? And I think this is where, the Bible is beautiful in the sense that we don't get the full answer to that question. But uncharacteristically, Jacob steps in and renames the child from Ben Oni to Benjamin. He is the only child of all of the 11 other sons and the one daughter that Jacob names, and for whom the name that is given by his father is the name that is attributed to him all his life. He's never known as Ben Oni, he's always known as Benjamin. Is Benjamin the son of my right? Possibly. Is it also possible that Yamin is the south? And there are some compelling arguments for Yamin as the southern region. So you are the son of the south. Okay? And she dies. But Tamot Rachel, but Tikaver B'derech Ephrata. She's buried there, Ibed Lechem. So this is the puzzle. She's buried there, and you see all my questions there. I'll end the share in a second and get you to Vayatzev Yaakov Matzevai, puts up a monument, and he goes there. Vayisa Yisrael Vayet Oholo Mehala. It's a nice play on words here. It's why I highlighted Oholo Mehala. It's just playing on the sound. The Migdal Eder, which is just a little south of Bethlehem, that's where he goes. And then we get this crazy story when Vayihi Bishkon Yisrael Be'aretz Ahi, when he dwelt there, Reuben went and slept with Bilhah, his father's Pelegish, but we recall that Bilhah is Rachel's concubine. Israel hears, and then we get the genealogy, and then we get the death of Isaac, and Isaac is buried in Ma'arat HaMechpelah by Esav and Yaakov together. Okay, so now I'm going to open it back to our questions here. Where there we go. Okay, so when reading this story, and I'm saying that it's a story of many transitions here, what questions may you have from this? Did we lose Marlene here? I guess we lost Marlene somewhere. Okay, go ahead. Anybody, go ahead, Alana.
Why wasn't Rachel buried in Me'arat HaMachpelah?
Well, I think that is probably the most important question that emerges from this story, which is it seems so odd. So having anticipated the question, I want to just give you back the map here and show you. So if she dies, I'm going to make it just a little larger, okay, and move it down. Sorry. Well, I can't seem to. Here it. Okay, so you see that this area, this is Bethel, Bethlehem, and this is the tomb of Rachel, and this is Bethlehem, and this is Hebron. Hebron is about 25 miles from Bethlehem. I guess that's a day's journey. All right, but it still begs the question, which is, look, if she died, there possibly would have been a way to get to Hebron, right? Even in a day. I mean, I don't want to superimpose our modern Jewish funerary practices on an ancient story, but even in antiquity, the idea of burying someone quickly probably would have been desirable, given the fact that the body begins to decompose immediately. So they would have wanted to bury her immediately. So one thing you could say is, well, maybe he didn't want to wait, and he wanted to bury her immediately where he could, and so therefore he buried her at the side of the road. Or maybe we can go a little bit into his emotional life, and that is to say that he was very distressed by her death and didn't know what to do, right? Or maybe we could say the following, which is, he was no slouch. He was, at this point in the story, the only people buried in Ma'arat HaMachpelah were Abram and Sarah. So essentially, Ma'arat HaMachpelah function not as a as a family tomb, but just as the Abraham Sarah tomb. You go to the cemetery today and you'll see that there are family plots. Occasionally, and I have no doubt that this follows along that line, which is that people see themselves as patriarchal, matriarchal, and they'll buy a big plot of graves, 12, maybe more, because they anticipate that their families will grow. They don't buy 12 graves for themselves. They buy and they set up a big monument at the grave, and with the anticipation that you'll have a place, you'll have a place, you'll have a place, and your grandchildren will have a place, etc., etc. And it's almost like they really personify a biblical paradigm. So maybe Jacob is saying, look, I want my own. I want my own. Or maybe it's emotion, or maybe it's something else. Now, the later commentators, deal with this question, and it's really it's a whole subject, and it's on its own. They'll say that this gives Leah more prominence because she's buried there. They'll say things like that Rachel herself was given prominence by doing, or because Jacob, and this is quite midrashic, Jacob anticipates later history for Israel. Not only that, but the tomb of Rachel figures very prominently in the histories of Benjamin and also Judah. What territory is it part of? Is it part of the Judah territory or the Benjamin territory? Shaul is the king who is a Benjaminite, and in the Shaul stories, the tomb of Rachel is in Benjamin territory. But David and the Judean kings are from Judah, and in the tradition of the Davidic traditions, the tomb of Rachel is in Judite territory, so it's confusing. Aside from the history of it, I think the story reads well on its own, which is, one could easily interpret it as saying he's just overwhelmed, and here's where I would go with this. I would say he has the desire to end up in Hebron. I know, Bob, his desire is to end up in Hebron and to go, to do the burial there may take away from what he wants to actually do there and be established there himself. Bob, what's your position on this?
I actually placed something in the chat that you might want to read to folks, and then I'll comment on that if you'd like to read that out.
I don't see it in the chat.
All right, I'll read it then. Could Rachel's death in childbirth and the tomb be serving as a marker for all of us to be aware and address the powerful impact of stressors on health? And I mentioned that in New Jersey, there's actually a maternal mortality initiative that the governor has put into place. And to me, the fact that she died on the road and it's not a single destination is a comment that this happens on our travels, on our journeys.
Yes.
And in fact, when I read the story, it reminds me of patients I cared for, babies that I delivered way back, and the effect of all these things. In the text, it says, what did the killing do to me, Jacob? But why didn't he ask, what did it do to Rachel and the rest of the family?
Yes. I think that that's a very, very valuable point. And here, I may encourage your corroboration here. Jacob is not without some responsibility here for the demise of his wife. The text says, he goes from Bethel, he leaves Bethel. So I tried to kind of imagine, your wife she's 9 months pregnant. She's not a healthy woman, right? She was not able to have children. It was a miracle that she had the last child. Who knows what the problem was, but are you that, you've had already 12 other children. don't you know anything about women? Don't you know anything about childbirth at this point? And don't you know that women in their 9th month of pregnancy are going to go into labor when you go for a walk, okay? What do the OBGYNs tell their patients? They say, look, if things are not moving, why don't you go for a walk? Why don't you, they don't tell them to do strenuous exercise, but get things going. Go for a walk and things will start moving, right? And so doesn't he know something? I mean, this is not, science. This is folk wisdom at this point. And so by moving and by having these kinds of events, and they are stress events, and I think it's really, really important that you raise that issue. These are stress-inducing events, revelations, sacrifices, the whole business, and your wife is pregnant. So he wants to get to Hebron so that, I guess the story is, he wants to get there so that the baby will be born in Hebron next to his father. Maybe, but it doesn't happen. And the price that he pays is that the baby's born, but the mother dies. And maybe that would have happened anyway, but maybe not. And I think that there's the tragic outcome here is lasts for the rest of Jacob's life. We have to read the rest of the stories that especially at the death of Jacob, this tremendous guilt that he has for the death of Rachel. How could he not feel?
He apologizes to his son.
Exactly. How could he not feel somewhat guilty? Look, he's deprived Joseph and Benjamin of their mother. Joseph is a few years old at this point. Benjamin is a baby. Benjamin grows up without a mother. It's like, Diana, Queen, the Princess Diana. She's killed when the boys are very little. They grow up essentially without their mother. They may have a whole retinue but they don't have their mother. And you wonder, what extent that has had an effect on them. And it's certainly had an effect on Jacob to the extent that will play itself out in next week's Parsha. Why is he so close to Joseph? Why is he so protective of Benjamin? He's protected because he's feeling he's demolished. He's, here, I want to say, look at the trajectory of the character also. Jacob, starts out in stealth and is mischievous, but he becomes a person who is very sensitive to rules and to customs, and wants to be an honorable person, is totally dismayed when his sons go on a rampage. It's really an affront to him, and this is the beginning of the end. And then, in that little footnote where Reuben sleeps with Bilhah, what's going on there is the usurpation of the role that Rachel had by sleeping with Bilhah. What Reuben is saying is, now my mother Leah is your primary wife. Bilhah is no longer, if I sleep with Bilhah, he is saying, you can't sleep with her anymore. She's defiled. So by defiling Bilhah, Reuben renders her inaccessible to Jacob, and therefore Leah becomes the only one that he can cohabit with. And so that makes Leah ascendant. And then that also makes Jacob possibly inclined towards Leah because of the way that he treated her his whole life. He was really nasty to her. It's a messy story.
Well, I guess So the only thing I wanted to add to that is that not just centering on Jacob, but everybody else involved had committed different sorts of sins and atrocities. And so the collective purification, passing Rachel's tomb, is sort of a reminder of not just what Jacob should or shouldn't have done, but all the other events that are intersecting at that point, at least for me, as I read that.
I think that's also very valuable, and to some extent that the shrine that emerges there becomes that kind of focal point of all of the patriarchal and associated misdeeds, transgressions, as you correctly say. Okay? Any other comments here? I know we're over. Go ahead, Ilana.
The fact that Rachel was buried in the middle of the road doesn't actually take away from her being special. On the contrary, it's not what Jacob wanted, it's what she would want. She would want to be buried in such a place where her children and future children and Israeli soldiers would pass by, and she will still be the mother. And she's the only one, I think, except maybe Chava Em Kol Chai, but Rachel is called Rachel Imenu. Right.
That is correct. That is correct. Look, there's no question that she captivates a certain place within the religious imagination already from the Bible. When the Torah kind of hints at that, ad hayom hazeh, right? She is buried there. How does it say? It says, uh, um, al kfurata hi matzevet kfurat Rachel ad hayom. This is the grave until today, which means that to the writer here, this place is known, and they know that it has a legendary status. John.
I just want to make a comment about a missing person, namely Rebecca.
Yes.
Rebecca, in the beginning, is the model of Chesed. At the end, she's a non-person. No mention is made of her death in the Torah. It seems like a pretty bad thing to happen to someone who was a paragon of virtue. Maybe she lost for what she did. Maybe she lost that status. But I think it's pretty sad that there's no mention of Rebecca as to her death.
The only thing that's mentioned is that she's buried. When Jacob says, or it's Sham kavru et Yitzchak kavru et Rivka. So it doesn't mention this, and I think that there is some lingering pathos in the story, because she says to him when she sends him back to Lavan, stay there for a couple of weeks and I'll get you, and she never gets him. And that pattern is going to repeat itself with Joseph. Joseph, one of the lingering points of curiosity in the Joseph story is that he's down in Egypt for all this length of time. He doesn't send a postcard, and there's a reason for that. The reason is because his own mother didn't send, or because Jacob's mother didn't send a postcard even to Jacob. Although the rabbis are clever here, they say that the death of Devorah meneked Rivka, that the reason why she is present is because Rivka dispatched her to retrieve Jacob. That's a very, very clever way around this whole problem. Of course, it's a midrash. It's not in the text. The text is much darker and much more full of crisis, I think. Anyway, it's an uplifting story, I can see. What it signals, the Torah is really signaling to us that things are going to change, that we're now transitioning, and of course we're going to get other signals to that with the genealogies of Esav, and then right at the beginning of next week's Parasha, Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv be'eretz Canaan ele toldot Yaakov Yosef. And then when the Torah says these are the generations of Jacob, Joseph, we know we're getting the signal, really loud and clear. The story is changing, and now we'll have the balance of the book of Genesis, the last 4 parshas, dealing with the stories of Joseph, which are encapsulated within the final stories of Jacob. And with that, we will conclude today. Thank you so much. This was always beautiful, wonderful, and see you soon. Don't forget, we have